Right now, in California, something remarkable and deeply frustrating is happening. Before we begin, if you want serious, fact-driven reporting that breaks down the real forces shaping America's economy, housing market, and public policy, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We cover the stories behind the headlines, the ones that explain why the system works the way it does, and sometimes why it doesn't. Nearly 40,000 affordable housing units are ready to be built. The land is secured, the designs are finished, local approvals have already been granted, developers are standing by, but construction hasn't started. Not because of protests, not because of zoning fights, not because of environmental lawsuits. This time, the reason is simpler: money. Across California, roughly 39,880 affordable housing units are stuck in what developers describe as financial purgatory. These are projects that have cleared nearly every hurdle in the construction process. They are fully planned, legally approved, and in many cases already partially funded. Yet they remain frozen, waiting for the final piece of financing. To understand the scale of the problem, consider one small project in Modesto. On East Morris Avenue, a proposed apartment complex called Morris Village promises 44 affordable housing units. Half of them would be reserved for people currently experiencing homelessness. The location was carefully chosen, next to a busy bus line, close to community resources, and designed to offer far more than just housing. Plans include on-site mental health services, job training programs, community activities like fitness classes. On paper, it's exactly the type of development California's leaders say they desperately want more of. And yet, 6 years after the project was first proposed, construction still hasn't started. The developers have assembled a complicated financial puzzle to get this far. They've secured local government support, private loans, corporate grants, even a donated plot of land from a philanthropic foundation. But they're still short of the total funding needed to begin construction, just short enough to keep everything stuck. The story of Morris Village isn't unique. It represents a larger statewide bottleneck that has quietly emerged in California's housing system. According to a recent analysis by housing nonprofit researchers, there are 461 affordable housing developments across the state in a similar position, all of them shovel-ready, all of them approved, all of them missing just one final piece of financing. Altogether, these stalled projects add up to nearly 40,000 homes. And to unlock them, developers estimate the state would need roughly $4.1 billion in additional support. To many housing advocates, this situation exposes a strange contradiction in California policy. For years, lawmakers have warned about the state's housing crisis. Rents have skyrocketed. Home prices have climbed beyond reach for millions of residents. Homelessness remains a persistent challenge across major cities. In response, state regulators have set aggressive targets for housing construction. Local governments have been ordered to plan for the development of roughly 2.5 million additional housing units by the end of this decade. 1 million of those homes are supposed to be affordable for people earning less than 80% of the median income in their region. But the private market rarely builds housing for people in that income range. Simply put, it's not profitable enough. Construction costs in California are extremely high. Land prices are among the highest in the country. Labor costs are significant, and financing complex affordable housing developments requires layers of subsidies that can take years to assemble. That's why nonprofit developers often rely heavily on government programs, tax credits, grants, and low-interest loans designed to fill the gap between what renters can afford and what construction actually costs. Right now, that system has hit a wall. To understand why, it helps to look at how the bottleneck has shifted over time. A decade ago, the biggest challenge facing affordable housing developers in California was getting approval to build in the first place. Local planning boards, city councils, and neighborhood opposition groups could delay projects for years. Developers often had to navigate endless public meetings, design revisions, and the constant threat of lawsuits. Only a small percentage of projects survived that process. But in recent years, California lawmakers began aggressively reforming those rules. New state laws weakened local barriers and made it easier to approve affordable housing developments, especially in urban areas. Suddenly, more projects began clearing those early hurdles, which meant more developers were competing for the next step in the process: funding. That's when the bottleneck moved further down the road. And now it has moved again. Federal policy changes last year expanded access to one of the most important funding sources for affordable housing, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. This program allows private investors to finance affordable housing projects in exchange for tax reductions. It has been the backbone of affordable housing construction in the United States for decades. The expansion should have made it easier to finance projects, but there's a catch. Developers can't access those federal tax credits until they have secured all the other pieces of financing needed for the project. And that final funding layer, often provided by state programs, is currently in short supply. In other words, projects are reaching the finish line only to find the last step missing. The situation creates a kind of financial traffic jam. Developers assemble multiple funding sources, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes as many as 6. Each funding program operates on its own schedule, with its own requirements and application deadlines. Every additional funding source adds complexity, and every delay adds cost. While developers wait for approvals or new funding rounds, construction costs continue to rise. Interest accumulates on pre-construction loans. Staff must still be paid, and inflation quietly erodes the original project budgets. Research from housing experts has found that every additional funding source can delay construction by roughly 4 months. Those delays add an average of more than $20,000 per housing unit. Multiply that across an entire development and the financial strain quickly becomes enormous. This is why developers describe the current situation as a bottleneck with no clear exit. Projects are ready, communities want them, but the financing system is simply too fragmented and too slow to keep up. State officials are aware of the problem. Some reforms are already underway. California's government has begun reorganizing parts of its housing finance system in an attempt to streamline the process. Plans are in motion to create a new cabinet-level housing agency that would consolidate several existing funding programs. The idea is simple. Give developers a single place to apply for state housing assistance rather than navigating multiple agencies with separate applications. If implemented successfully, the reform could reduce some of the delays that currently slow down affordable housing development, but structural changes alone may not be enough. Ultimately, building affordable housing requires money, and California hasn't approved a major new statewide housing funding package since 2018, when voters approved a bond measure that provided billions in subsidies. That funding pool has now largely run dry. Today, the state expects roughly $1.8 billion in housing funding to be available this year through a mix of existing programs and previously approved spending. But that still falls well short of what developers say is needed to unlock the current backlog of projects. Some lawmakers are pushing for a larger solution. A proposal is already circulating that would place a $10 billion affordable housing bond on the statewide ballot in 2026. If voters approve it, supporters say the impact could be immediate. Thousands of currently stalled housing units could move forward almost overnight. But until something like that happens, the bottleneck remains. Projects continue to sit on the shelf. Developers continue waiting, and tens of thousands of potential homes remain unbuilt in a state that desperately needs them. At this point in the story, it's worth pausing for a moment. If you find this kind of in-depth analysis useful, breaking down the policies, economics, and decisions shaping major national issues, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Our goal is to explain the real forces behind the headlines, not just the headlines themselves. Because the truth is, the affordable housing crisis in California isn't simply a story about high rents or rising construction costs. It's also a story about systems. Complicated systems, layers of approvals, layers of funding programs, layers of political decisions made over decades. Every layer was created for a reason. Some were designed to ensure accountability. Others were meant to distribute funding fairly. Others emerged from political compromises. But together, they have created a process that can take years, even when everyone agrees the housing should be built. And that's where the paradox becomes impossible to ignore. California leaders say the state needs millions of new homes. Developers say they're ready to build them. Communities increasingly recognize the need for affordable housing. Yet thousands of projects remain stuck, not because they failed, but because they succeeded almost completely. They navigated the approvals, they secured partial funding, they survived the planning process, and then they stopped, waiting for one final piece of financing that never quite arrives. For the families who could live in those homes, the delay isn't just a technical issue, it's another year of searching for affordable rent. Another year of overcrowded apartments. Another year of people slipping into homelessness. Housing policy debates often focus on long-term solutions, zoning reform, tax policy, development incentives. But sometimes the most immediate solution is simply finishing what has already started. In California right now, nearly 40,000 homes are waiting for exactly that. And whether those homes get built may depend on the decisions lawmakers make over the next few budget cycles. If funding arrives, construction could begin quickly. If it doesn't, the bottleneck could continue growing. Projects could expire, budgets could collapse, developers could walk away, and the housing crisis could deepen, despite the fact that the blueprints for solving part of it are already sitting on desks across the state. If you want to keep following these kinds of stories, the intersection of economics, public policy, and the real-world consequences they create, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most revealing stories in America aren't about what's happening, they're about what isn't happening, and why.